B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, May 5th, 2017. I'm here in San Francisco at Disruption Junction, where two well-funded and overpriced startups have very different styles in confronting efforts to regulate them. I'm talking about Uber and Airbnb. First to the bad boys of Uber, led by this weird guy, Travis Kalanick. They have been fighting the city of San Francisco for some time now, trying every way they can to avoid disclosing who their San Francisco-based drivers are. And the bottom line here is that the city passed a regulation requiring the independent contractors who drive for Uber to register as business owners in the city. They're not employees, and so it is proper for them to register, just like somebody who runs a nail salon or a little recording studio like I do. I have a business license, and it is a public record. But Uber takes the position that disclosing the personal information about their drivers is a First Amendment issue. Now, the real reason is that Uber is trying to avoid every kind of regulation it can. And this is just their latest skirmish. So they're blaming the city, saying that it would expose their drivers to what? An angry rider who wants to get even with them? I don't know. And, of course, there are ways you can work around it. You don't have to use your home address. You can rent a post office box. You can use a mailbox, etc. kind of place. And also, you can file a DBA. And you can drive for Uber under Uber Driver Bob or whatever name you want to use. So this is just another wave of obstruction from Uber. And, this idea that they can hide behind the First Amendment, I find laughable. But there is one issue that I think is germane. And that is, I have a friend who drives for Uber. She's an elderly woman on a fixed income, and for extra cash, she drives. And while she's driving, I take care of her dog. And so I know from that friend how things work. She's based here in Marin County. She does drive into San Francisco regularly to both drop off and pick up fares. And it's hard to know where she should be licensed. And that is, I think, a wobbler issue in favor of the Uber drivers, because if you work in San Francisco but you live in the suburbs, as many of those drivers do, you may have a fair objection to having to register in every place where you drive your car for Uber. Now, setting a better example for compliance with regulation is Airbnb. And I want to mention that both of these stories in the San Francisco Chronicle that I've linked to are written by Carolyn Said. She is a personal friend, and she also has drawn and done a great job on the Disruption Junction beat for the Chronicle. So last year, Airbnb sued San Francisco, and the judge in the case ruled in favor of the city, because the ordinance that requires vacation rental hosts to register with the city took effect 2 years ago, but only about 25% of the so-called Airbnb hosts complied by registering and taking out a license and agreeing to collect the hotel tax from their renters. By the way, the compliance rate at Uber for drivers registering is somewhere in the 30% range, just to give you a little comparison. But I think it's very interesting because Airbnb is recognizing that it will be regulated and that it is disruptive to the fabric of every community where it operates. It's taking housing off the rental market for middle and low-income families who might rent it on an annual basis and delivering higher rental rates in most cases to the owners through the short-term rental approach. And I want to be candid. I have considered my partner Kathy and I have looked at buying some vacation-type property and using Airbnb or one of its competitors. And there are restrictions in many communities now, and I respect those restrictions. And I would operate under those in compliance with them if I ever did become an Airbnb host. But I think it is interesting. They have this very high-powered flack, Chris Lahane. He's now Airbnb's head of global public policy. He was in the Bill Clinton White House. He's a real attack dog kind of PR guy. And even he said, well, this agreement will allow hosts to comply with San Francisco laws with simplicity, certainty, and visibility. And Lahane said, we want to move on and talk about other things. Well, I give him some credit for his candor there. So I think that this is a win-win. I accept that these disruptive companies will continue to operate, and that if you hold an expensive taxi medallion, you are in bad shape. And if you live next to a frequently rented Airbnb property, you know that that's not a very attractive prospect. Well, our disruptor-in-chief is back at it. They really should take away his phone and his Twitter account. But he is, of course, belly-aching because adults in the room persuaded him not to demand the funding for the wall, not to push for other items on the Trump agenda, and face a government shutdown that could have occurred last Friday, then they extended it, could have occurred this next Friday, but the Republican and Democratic leaders on Capitol Hill have come to an agreement, and it excludes most of what Trump has asked for. So he's pissing on them with his tweets. Tweet number 1, the reason for the plan negotiated between the Republicans and Democrats is that we need 60 votes in the Senate, which are not there. Tweet 2, we either elect more Republican senators in 2018 or change the rules now to 51%. Our country needs a good shutdown in September to fix mess. Now, this just shows the amateur nature of Trump in his approach to this very important job that he scammed himself into. And it just shows that he is willing to shut down the government, to hurt many innocent people in the process, to waste money, in order to, wrench from the process the extreme agenda that he, has elliptically presented to his rallies over the past year and a half or whatever it's been now. But here's a quote from Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington and on the Appropriations Committee. Trump may not like what he sees in this budget deal, but it's dangerous and irresponsible to respond by calling for a shutdown. Hopefully, Republicans in Congress will do for the next budget what they did for this one. Ignore Trump's demands, work with Democrats, and get it done. And in some ways, I wrestle with the idea about whether to really talk about Trump's idiocy, especially on matters that aren't relevant, like trying to rewrite history to suggest that Andrew Jackson could have stopped the Civil War if he'd only managed to live about 16 years longer than he actually did. And what arises here is just how out of touch with reality and history the former reality TV star is. And all you can do is shake your head. He has all kinds of people who support him, who try to rationalize and explain and recalibrate what he said to try to put it in the realm of sensible or rational thought. One of his tweets, President Andrew Jackson, who died 16 years before the Civil War started, saw it coming and was angry, would never have let it happen. Now, can you see 16 years from today? Can you see forces that are leading to some kind of conflict in the U.S. or elsewhere? I mean, that's just such bullshit. And his weak links to history showed up at one of the golf courses he owns in Virginia, where he posted a plaque honoring the River of Blood, where so many soldiers died in the Civil War that the water would turn red, even though no battle ever took place near the location of that plaque. And one of McCain's advisors, John Weaver, tweeted his response, or maybe this is just a comment without bothering to use Twitter. Too bad President Jackson didn't ride up to Bowling Green, sit down with Frederick Douglass at the besieged Nordstrom's, and figure out Civil War thingy. Oh, we live in bizarre times. Jason Leopold, friend and colleague of this podcast, now at BuzzFeed News. has got an interesting story that he posted yesterday. The context here is this is the time when Trump's casinos in Atlantic City were going down. He had scammed his investors for as much as $1 billion, and they were breathing down his neck. They had a lawyer who had trying to recapture money from Trump. This, of course, was the same source for his massive tax deduction that could have lasted. It was $900 million and could have lasted for as long as 20 years, carrying it forward. Well, the attorney in this case is a fellow named Hansen, Christopher with a K, Christopher Hansen. And he got a call on a specific date. And the call came from a payphone across the street from the Ed Sullivan Theater in New York. And the cross-check by a talented reporter like Jason Leopold shows that this occurred at 2:05 p.m., February 18th, 2009. The caller, with a thick New York accent, threatened the attorney, Hansen. And I won't attempt the New York accent. I'll just quote here. "My name is Carmine. I don't know why you're fucking with Mr. Trump, but if you keep fucking with Mr. Trump, we know where you live, and we're going to your house for your wife and kids." Now, Hansen has speculated that the caller was Trump's bodyguard, and the article I don't think suggests this, but I will. It could have been Trump. Remember how Trump impersonated his own PR guy and got caught doing it? So this was a day that Trump was a guest on The Late Show with David Letterman. And he likely would have been in the neighborhood because he was instructed to arrive in advance to the taping at 4:30 p.m. that day. So it's an interesting piece. I've linked to it in the show file for this podcast, so go ahead and check it out. Now, in my view, Hillary Clinton has some similarities to Donald Trump. She really can't take responsibility herself. She can give lip service to it. But she finds the need to blame other people, other factors, for her historic loss in the November election. And let me note that in an interview with Christiane Amanpour on a stage in New York yesterday, she did say that she takes absolute personal responsibility for losing to Trump. But Philip Rucker of the Washington Post, reporting on the event, said she did not assign any blame to her strategy or her staff, nor did she point to her own weaknesses as a candidate or the struggles by her and her team to understand the angry mood of key parts of the electorate. What's especially troubling is she says that she is now part of the resistance to Donald Trump. Okay. She also, like Trump, was kind of trying to rewrite history. She says, if the election had been held on October 27th, I would be your president. And she cited James Comey, the FBI director, and his announcement of the renewed investigation because of the Anthony Weiner laptop that included Clinton emails from the State Department, and the release of campaign chairman John Podesta's emails, which were allegedly stolen by Russian hackers. And I don't believe that. I believe that Podesta was phished, and he responded to it, and we still don't know exactly who was responsible for the Podesta emails. And she also says that the media was a factor, unfair treatment by the media, and that is true. Trump got so much fawning coverage. And the other night, Samantha Bee did her alternative White House Correspondents show. There were some good elements to it, a lot of good produced spoofs and funny things about the media. But one of the things she did was, for most of the show, there was an empty podium in front of a bunch of American flags, like the ones that Trump set up. And I remember vividly a year ago watching CNN and even MSNBC. And Trump would be scheduled to speak maybe in 45 minutes, and they would put on a podium watch. And during that time, Bernie Sanders was actually speaking. And they had live coverage of Bernie Sanders, but they didn't go to it. Instead, they gave us Trump's podium and the countdown. When will he come out? Wow, what's he going to say? Who will he insult today? A disabled person or John McCain or exactly who? So also, Hillary says that misogyny, hatred of women, was a factor. And I agree that it was a factor, but I think she seems to think of it as the defining factor. And I believe that the people who hated Hillary hated her not just because she's female, but because of Bill Clinton, because of her own service as a U.S. Senator and as Secretary of State, because of her self-inflicted wounds. And I don't believe that there were that many people who hated her or couldn't vote for her simply because of her sex. And I hear a lot of people, in fact, I'm scheduled to interview an author in a couple of weeks who has written a book full of these apologies for Hillary, and it's a feminist perspective on the brutal misogyny that cost her the election. And that's going to be an interesting interview. I can tell you that right now. But here's what she said about misogyny. It is real. It is very much a part of the landscape politically and socially and economically. It played a role in this election, and I will have a lot to say about it in her book coming out this fall. And I believe that, like Trump, she is not over this election. She keeps rehashing it. And she doesn't speak about it as frequently as Trump, but she doesn't speak publicly as much as Trump has recently. And over at the Law News blog run by Dan Abrams, he used to be on TV, and he's an attorney, and I have mixed feelings about him personally. But an article published on April 29th is covering a lawsuit that was filed a year ago by supporters of Bernie Sanders. It's a class action against the Democratic National Committee, essentially saying that the committee violated its own rules by tipping its favoritism to the Clinton campaign. But the lawyers for the DNC are so brazen. One of them said this is a quote, we could have voluntarily decided that, look, we're going to go into back rooms like they used to and smoke cigars and pick the candidate that way. That's not the way it was done, but they could have, and that would have also been their right. The same lawyer also said there is no contractual obligation to prevent advantage or disadvantage between candidates, and that the even-handedness and impartiality language in the DNC charter is not self-defining. It's optional. Now, this is a remarkable set of claims to try to duck this lawsuit that exposes that the insiders, the establishment figures, the superdelegates, the Debbie Wasserman Schultzes, they believed that they were the absolute deciders of who the next president should be, and that the primary process and the involvement of the public is just window dressing. That's what I take from those comments. And speaking of Russia and the Trump-Russia scandal, Chuck Grassley, the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, wrote a letter to James Comey, the FBI director, and Comey is scheduled to appear on Capitol Hill, I think on Wednesday, before the Judiciary Committee. And Grassley has asked Comey to explain inconsistencies in information that Comey gave to him during a private briefing on March 15th with Senator Dianne Feinstein, the ranking Democrat on the committee. That information contained in Justice Department documents be made available to the committee only after the briefing. So the letter goes on, whether those inconsistencies were honest mistakes or an attempt to downplay the actual extent of the FBI's relationship with Christopher Steele, the author of the Trump dossier, it is essential that the FBI fully answer all of the questions. Now, I'll bet Too Tall Jim Comey's going to go in there and dance around all this, and he'll respond, but he won't answer. Grassley also requests documents on any payments the FBI may have made to Steele. He takes issue with the startling lack of responsiveness from the FBI with regards to the committee's request for information about the resignation of Mike Flynn. And so it could be a pretty heated exchange. We shall see. Researchers at Georgetown University's School of Law have filed a FOIA lawsuit against the New York City Police Department for that agency's refusal to disclose documents about its longstanding use of face recognition technology. Now, facial recognition has been part of the NYPD's real-time crime center since 2011, and we don't know too much more about it. The study by Georgetown Law's Center on Privacy and Technology has taken a look at public records across the country, and they've learned that some of the vendors of this technology have revealed that they supply their facial recognition systems to the NYPD. But the police department says there are no documents relevant to the search requested by the Georgetown Law School team. So, in fact, in January of this year, the PD determined it was unable to find any records responsive to the center's detailed records request. And this is an area that the public deserves to have knowledge of. We got to get beyond the TV shows like Homeland and this CBS series. What's it called? It's a fugitive thing. I can't recall what it is right now. Anyway, these shows, freely use the surveillance systems that are in place, and some of them may be fictionalized, but I expect that most of them are not. So we'll see if the NYPD actually coughs up the information. Every day I like to pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the PBC Podcast with your subscriptions. Catherine Hemness just renewed her annual subscription a couple of weeks ago. Thank you, Catherine. Pauline Nixon is a monthly subscriber who does more than she has to. Keith Hull, Kevin Beckley, they've been in the mix for quite a while, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Yeah, I'd like you. That's you with the earbuds on right now listening to me. Come on over to peterbcollins.com. If you got a little money in the bank, I'd like you to take out a subscription. You just click on the menu button no matter what device you're using, then pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page, and in just a couple of minutes, you can have your very own subscription. I'd also like to note that I got an SOS from Roger and Carol Schuler. Roger, of course, is the journalist who's exposed all of the corruption in Alabama. He's living in uncomfortable exile in Missouri, and they live in a flea bag motel on a week-to-week basis. Their life is very difficult, and they've hit the wall again. So if you can help out, I'm going to send them a few bucks myself. Go to legalschnauzer.blogspot.com, and there is a PayPal button right there on the home page, very prominently displayed. Today I'm releasing an interview to subscribers that is quite different from what you might expect. I think that I can say safely that none of my listeners has ever heard of artist Al Ferro. And I only learned about him recently because I went to a local art preserve up in Napa County, and then I went to an art opening last week in San Francisco. And I was stunned by the work of Al Ferro. He has done a series that he calls Divine Ammunition, and he expresses his own anti-war sentiments in art that is created using bullet casings, the lead part of a bullet, also gun barrels and actual guns, related materials. And he is so creative that you have to look closely and then you react. He is a very provocative artist. And in this excerpt, you will hear him define himself that way. Here is Al Ferro.
I think social commentary art is more popular now than it has been for a lot of years. But I think that it's important for people to do this kind of art, and it's important for people to see it because it's provocative. And I consider myself actually a provocateur. I don't care what people think when they look at my work. I just want to make them think. And I want to make them think about the symbols that are in front of them. There's violence, there's religious references, there's historical references. And depending on your background, your education, your awareness, you're going to get out of it what you bring to it. But I hide things in layers, and I hope that people will discover it. So let me offer that you can look at my work online at alfaro.com. The series we're talking about is the Reliquary series, and you just click on Reliquaries on the homepage. But there are many other series of my older work, and you can see all the things we're talking about, from the Icarus series, the African series, and then there's a series on women, but they're not all just pretty women. So there's a lot to see, and I hope people who listen to this will go to the website and look at it, and then if you have the opportunity, see the shows in person.
I invite you to listen to the full interview with Al Ferro, available today for subscribers at peterbcollins.com. Well, the Pentagon wants you to think that there's really good news about their crackdown on sexual assault among soldiers and their commanders. And on the face of it, there is some good news, because sexual assault rates have dropped if you compare the numbers of the past couple of years. So in 2006, the estimate was that 34,200 members had been sexually assaulted. And the estimate, based on surveys and research and the actual reports of criminal acts, shows that that number has been cut by more than 50% to just under 15,000. And here are the figures. The military authorities received 6,172 reports of sexual assault in 2016, which is about a 1.5% increase from 2015, but that's the number of cases reported. And the indications are that back in 2006, only 1 in 14 victims actually reported it. Today, about 1 in 3 do. But here's the real problem. The retaliation against the victims continues at an excruciatingly alarming rate. Almost 2/3 of both male and female service members who reported being sexually assaulted said they experienced reprisal or mistreatment after reporting their assault. And the climate in the military is still like a high school boys' locker room. We know that active and veteran Marines shared and solicited hundreds of nude photographs of female service members in a private Facebook group called Marines United. And the Navy is investigating a similar scheme where 30 Marines are implicated. Now to a couple of cases of cops killing unarmed civilians. The former South Carolina police officer who killed an unarmed black motorist back in April of 2015, the man who died was Walter Scott, and he ran away from the cop after a traffic stop because he thought he was going to get locked up for failing to pay child support. He was unarmed. But Michael Slager, who ran him down and caught him, and then claims that Walter Scott was trying to grab his taser from his belt, and then the officer, former officer Michael Slager, said he pulled out his gun and shot Walter Scott. Now, there was a trial that resulted in a hung jury, and in order to avoid the retrial, Slager has pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of using excessive force. Now, what's remarkable about this case is from the get-go, the district attorney in Charleston treated this as a homicide. And that's what changed, I think, the tenor of some of these police killings of African Americans. And while nothing can bring back Walter Scott, I do believe that this is better justice than we had seen to date. Now, in a similar case, last weekend outside Dallas, a 15-year-old boy who apparently was leaving the scene of a rowdy party that cops had been called to was shot in the head by a Dallas police officer. Now, the incident is still under investigation. There's body camera footage. But again, the positive indication is that this is being treated as a homicide. And what we have learned is that at 11 p.m., drunken teens were reported walking around the neighborhood. Now, the cops first stated that the car in which Jordan Edwards, the 15-year-old high school student, was riding, attempted to run over the cops, or at least they thought it was headed in their direction. But the witnesses say no, they got in the vehicle and they drove away, and the cops shot at them because they were fleeing. And there's no indication that there was any threat of violence coming from that car full of teenagers. So this, again, is a positive indication. Also, the family has asked for no protests. They said they asked people to refrain from protest, violence, and marches in the name of Jordan or his family, describing his death as a tremendous loss. Now, just down the road from Dallas, about 60 miles in Corsicana, Texas, a very unusual trial is underway. A prosecutor who put away a guy to death row who was then executed despite his persistent claims of innocence. That prosecutor, John Jackson, went on to become a judge in Texas until he retired about 5 years ago. But now he is a defendant in the courtroom where he once tried cases. The charges brought by the State Bar of Texas, arguing that Jackson violated basic legal ethics in connection with his conduct in prosecuting that case. And I want to see this replicated. We've seen hundreds of innocent men released from death row and from life sentences in this country, and only a handful of prosecutors who put them there have been held responsible. And here's another case that cries for justice, and a little bit appears to be in view. Judge Leon Tucker of the Philadelphia Common Pleas Court has ordered the Office of the District Attorney to produce all of the documents relative to the prosecution of Mumia Abu-Jamal. And here, the prosecutor who's being investigated is named Ronald Castile. He was district attorney. Finally, he sat as a judge on the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, where I believe he was able to bat down some of the appeals that came on Mumia's behalf. So after 36 years in prison, and Mumia has maintained his innocence, and I believe it, we are seeing at least discovery that could lead to evidence helpful to Mumia. That is underway. The Republican effort to take another shot at repealing Obamacare and replacing it with something absolutely crappy has taken another setback, as Fred Upton of Michigan, a Republican who is described as moderate, and who carried some of the repeal bills that Obama vetoed. They never actually cleared the Senate, so they didn't require a veto, but they would have been. He has said that he can't support the current version of repeal because it does take away protections for pre-existing conditions, even though the language is confusing, and Republican leaders like Paul Ryan say, oh, you don't have anything to worry about. It's just going to be fine. And finally, today, the state of Kentucky may be losing its last abortion clinic and become the first state in the nation with zero access to abortion. The facility is named after the doctor who runs it, Ernest Marshall. It's the EMW clinic in Louisville, and it's the last abortion provider. Let's see, back in 1978, there were 17 abortion clinics in the state of Kentucky. Commonwealth. And now there's only one, and there are these pretextual laws that attempt to shut down clinics without outright banning abortion. There's a new 20-week limit on abortion, 20 weeks of pregnancy, and the other is this really offensive requirement that doctors have to take an ultrasound of a pregnant woman and then talk to her about it in detail, regardless of the patient's wishes. The governor of Kentucky, the current one, Matt Bevin, calls himself unapologetically pro-life, and he is prepared to make Kentucky abortion-free. And I consider that a real step forward back into the dark ages. Thanks for joining me for my News and Comment podcast. It's available free every day at peterbcollins.com and on YouTube.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to